The cold came through the gap under the back door the way it always does in late November. That particular draft that no amount of weather stripping ever fully fixes. I'd been meaning to replace the seal for 3 years. I never got around to it because there was always something else. My son's tuition, and my son's wedding. Then my son's temporary situation that turned into something else entirely. I was standing at the kitchen counter making tea when I heard him on the phone in the living room. He didn't know I was home. I'd come back early from my walk because my knee was acting up. The old hockey injury that flares every time the temperature drops below 0. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just standing there with my mug, waiting for the kettle. "He won't say anything," my son said. "He never does." I set the mug down very carefully so it wouldn't make a sound. "Just tell your parents they can have the big room. He'll take the basement. It's fine." The basement. My workshop. The room where I'd built his first bookshelf when he was 7, where I still kept his grandfather's tools hung on the pegboard wall, exactly the way my father had left them. I picked up the mug again. I drank my tea. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I looked at the framed photo on the dresser. My wife Patricia and I at Peggy's Cove the summer before she got sick, her hair blowing sideways, both of us laughing at something I can't remember anymore. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I opened the drawer of my nightstand, and I took out the small notebook I keep there, the one I use for grocery lists and appointment reminders, and the occasional thought I don't want to lose, and I wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh page. Pay attention. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 68 years old. I live in Guelph, Ontario. I spent 31 years as a mechanical engineer before I retired, and I own the house I am sitting in. Paid off the mortgage 11 years ago. Patricia and I did that together. Made the final payment on a Tuesday in March. Went out for dinner at the Italian place on Wyndham Street to celebrate. Split a bottle of Barolo. It was one of the best nights of my life, and I didn't know it at the time. Which is how it usually goes. Patricia passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There is no way to describe that kind of speed, except to say that the world has a gear you don't know exists until it shifts into it, and then everything that was familiar becomes something else. My son. I'll call him my son, because that's what he is and what he will always be, regardless of what I'm about to tell you. Moved back home 8 months after Patricia died. He said he and his wife needed to save money. They'd been renting a place in Mississauga. 2-bedroom, nice enough, but expensive. His wife had left her job to, as she put it, reassess her priorities. He was working in sales. The math wasn't adding up. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. This is his home. Patricia would have said yes without blinking. What I did not say yes to, what was never discussed, never proposed, never asked, was everything that came after. The first thing that changed was the kitchen. My daughter-in-law reorganized it the second week they were there. I came downstairs one morning and the coffee maker had moved. The mugs were in a different cabinet, and the good cast-iron pan that had been on the hook beside the stove since 1987 was in a box in the garage because it took up too much space. I found this out when I went looking for it. I stood in the garage, in my slippers, holding the box, and I thought, this is just an adjustment period. Everyone needs time to find a rhythm. I put the pan back on its hook, and I didn't say anything about the mugs. The second thing that changed was the living room. My daughter-in-law had strong opinions about furniture. The armchair I'd had since before my son was born, a big tan wingback that Patricia had reupholstered herself in 1998, appeared on the front porch one Saturday. I asked where it was going. She said they were donating it. She'd already called the Habitat for Humanity truck. It was picked up that afternoon. My son was at work. He texted me that evening, "Sorry, Dad, she mentioned it to me, but I forgot to run it by you." It was getting pretty worn, though, eh? I did not respond to that text. The third thing was the car. I have a 2019 Subaru Outback, fully paid, good condition. My son asked to borrow it for a weekend because his car needed brake work. That was in March. By June, he had a key copy made without mentioning it to me. I found out because I needed the car on the Thursday afternoon for a medical appointment, and it wasn't in the driveway. I took a taxi to the clinic. When I got home, the Outback was back, and my son said he hadn't realized I needed it. He seemed genuinely surprised that I'd be annoyed. "I'll just text you ahead of time from now on," he said, as if the problem were scheduling rather than the fact that he'd had a copy of my key made without asking. I wrote 3 more words in the notebook that night under the first 2. "This is escalating." The birthday dinner was my daughter-in-law's idea. She announced it at breakfast 2 weeks before. She'd invited her parents to come up from Windsor, her brother and his girlfriend, 2 of her friends from when she worked at the marketing firm. 15 people. Dinner at my house. It was, she explained, a joint celebration, her 32nd birthday, and a belated housewarming. She used the word housewarming without any particular awareness of what she was saying. I asked quietly if she'd like some help planning. She said she had it handled, and that I should just make sure I was free that Saturday. I want to be precise here because I've thought about this moment many times since. She did not ask if Saturday worked for me. She did not ask if I was comfortable with 15 guests. She did not at any point ask anything. She informed me. In my kitchen. About a party in my house. And then she poured herself a coffee and started scrolling through her phone. I said, "That sounds like a lot of people for the space." She said, "It'll be fine. We'll move the furniture." She did move the furniture. The Saturday of the party, while I was out walking, she and my son rearranged the main floor. When I came home, the dining table, the big oak one that had been in the same position for 22 years, the one where my son had done his homework, where we'd had Christmas dinners, where Patricia had sat, had been moved against the wall and supplemented with a folding table my daughter-in-law's father brought from Windsor in the back of his pickup. I showered and put on a clean shirt, and I came downstairs. The chair at the head of the table, my chair, the one with the slightly higher back, the one I'd always sat in, had a small handwritten card on it. It said, "Dad, reserved for Grandpa Kowalski." Her father's name, apparently, was Kowalski. I had met him once, briefly, at the wedding. He was a large man with a firm handshake and very little interest in anything I had to say. He was now going to sit in my chair at my table in my dining room. I picked up the card. I looked at it for a moment. Then I set it back down, and I went and stood by the window that looks out over the backyard, where Patricia's garden used to be before my daughter-in-law had the beds turned over to install a deck. My son came in from the kitchen carrying a tray of glasses. "Dad," he said, and there was something in his voice, a preemptive quality, like he knew what was coming and wanted to head it off. "It's just for tonight." "Of course," I said. I ate dinner that night in the folding chair at the end of the extension table, beside my daughter-in-law's friend from the marketing firm, who talked for 45 minutes about a renovation she was doing in her condo in Oakville. I ate the food. I smiled when it seemed appropriate. I watched my son at the other end of the table, laughing, pouring wine for people he'd known for 3 years, in the house where he grew up, in the chair his grandfather had sat in. When everyone left and my son and daughter-in-law were cleaning up, I said goodnight and went upstairs. I took out the notebook. I wrote one question. How long are you going to let this go on? I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and I listened to the sounds of my house, the furnace cycling, the pipes, the particular creak of the second stair from the top that had been there since before my son was born, and I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for months. Not what is happening, but why am I allowing it? The answer, when I let myself look at it directly, was complicated. He was my son. I loved him. I was lonely since Patricia died in a way that is hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. Not just missing her specifically, which I did every day, but missing the state of being known by someone. Having someone in the house felt like something, even when that something was frustrating, even when it cost me my chair. But the other part of the answer was this. I had been telling myself it was temporary, and I had never once asked them directly when they planned to leave. That was on me. That silence was mine. I had let it fill up with assumptions, and assumptions are where these things grow. The next morning, a Sunday, I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen table. Not my dining room chair, just the kitchen table. And I waited for my son to come downstairs. When he did, I said, "I'd like to talk about the living situation." He poured himself coffee. He didn't sit down. "What about it?" "I'd like to understand the plan, timeline-wise." He looked at me the way adults sometimes look at elderly parents. Patient, slightly pained, the look that means, "Here we go." "Dad, we're saving up. It takes time. The market's insane right now." "I understand the market is challenging," I said. "I'm asking about your specific plan." "We don't have a specific date if that's what you're asking." "That is what I'm asking." There was a pause. He said, "I didn't realize you wanted us out." That sentence. "I didn't realize you wanted us out," as if the burden were on me to announce that I wanted to live in my own house. As if staying indefinitely, without a plan, reorganizing someone else's home and using their car and canceling the garden, was simply a neutral state of affairs that I was now disrupting by having an opinion. I said, "I don't want you out. I want us to have a real conversation about what this looks like going forward." He said he talked to his wife. He took his coffee upstairs. That conversation never happened. In January, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her office was downtown, above a dry cleaner on McDonnell Street, and she had a rubber plant in the corner that had seen better days and a directness I appreciated immediately. I explained the situation. She asked a few questions. She said, "Since your son and daughter-in-law have been living in your home for more than 12 months without a formal lease, they are considered occupants with tenancy rights under Ontario law. But because the property is your primary residence and you share the kitchen and bathroom, different rules apply. You have more options than you might think." She walked me through them. I took notes. I thanked her. On the way home, I stopped at a Tim Hortons and sat for a while with a medium double-double, and I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would say. She was not a soft woman. People sometimes thought so because she was warm, but they were wrong. She was warm and she was clear, and she did not believe in letting things fester. "If something's wrong, name it," she used to say. Naming it doesn't make it worse. Not naming it does. I named it then, to myself, sitting at a Tim Hortons in January. I had been treated with steadily increasing disrespect in my own home for 11 months. I had let it happen, and I was now going to stop letting it happen. That was the whole of it. No villain story, no elaborate grievance, just a correction. I went home, and I started making a list. The list took several weeks. I was methodical about it. That's the engineer in me, probably. I documented things I could prove, the car key, which I had changed back in October, and had the locksmith receipt, the chair at the dinner party, which I had a photo of because my daughter-in-law had posted it on Instagram with the caption "Celebrating in Style," and I had quietly saved it. The cast iron pan, for which I still had the Habitat Restore transaction record they'd emailed me. When I called to ask about donations, I wrote down the conversation about the basement. I noted the date, the time, what I'd been doing, exactly what I'd heard. I also looked into the Subaru when my son had taken it for brake work. Back in the original, legitimate borrowing in March, he had added himself to my insurance policy as a secondary driver. He'd done this through my broker, who had sent me an email confirmation that I'd either missed or forgotten. My son was currently paying none of my insurance premiums. He was listed as a secondary driver on a vehicle he used freely and without asking. I called my broker and had his name removed. I did not tell my son. I also had a quiet conversation with my financial advisor, who I've known for 15 years. I won't go into the specifics. What matters is that I made sure my accounts and assets were clearly documented and protected, and that I understood exactly where I stood. This is something I should have done the week they moved in. If you take nothing else from what I'm telling you, take that. In March, 11 months after my son and daughter-in-law moved in, my daughter-in-law's parents came for a visit. They were staying in the guest room, my office where I kept my books and my drafting table, for 4 days. On the second day, her father, the man who had sat in my chair at the birthday dinner, walked through my workshop in the basement without asking and moved several of my father's tools off the workbench to make room for a portable speaker he wanted to plug in. I found this when I went down to work on a small cabinet I'd been building. I stood there, and I looked at my father's tools on the floor. I went back upstairs. I went to my son's door, and I knocked. He opened it. I said, very calmly, "Your father-in-law has moved my things in the workshop. I'd like them replaced where they were." My son looked past me, slightly, the way people do when they're calculating. Then he said, "Dad, he's a guest. Can you just—" "He is your guest," I said. "In my house. Please have him replace the tools." My son's expression did something complicated. Then my daughter-in-law appeared behind him and said, "What's the problem?" I told her. She said, "He just needed some space. He wasn't going to hurt anything." I said, "The tools are on the floor." She said, "I'm sure he'll tidy up when he's done." I said, "I'd like it done now." There was a silence that had a particular texture to it, the texture of people deciding whether to take you seriously. Then my daughter-in-law said, not unkindly, but not kindly either, "You know, living with people means being a bit flexible. It goes both ways." I looked at her. I thought about the cast-iron pan, the wingback chair, the car key, the garden, the birthday dinner, 15 months of flexibility. I said, "You're right that it goes both ways." And I went back downstairs and I replaced my father's tools myself, and I texted my lawyer. I served the notice on a Wednesday morning. Under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act, the process for a landlord who shares kitchen and bathroom facilities with occupants is different from a standard tenancy, and I had confirmed with my lawyer that my situation qualified. The notice was formal, legal, properly prepared, and it gave them 60 days. I set it on the kitchen table before they came downstairs. Then I made myself breakfast and I sat and I ate it. My son came down first. He saw the envelope. He picked it up. He read it standing at the counter, still in the clothes he'd slept in. I watched his face. He said, "What is this?" "It's a formal notice," I said. "My lawyer can answer any questions about the legal specifics. Her contact information is on the second page." "Dad." His voice had changed completely. The calculation was gone. What was underneath it was younger, something I recognized from when he was a boy, and something that genuinely frightened him. I had to hold on to what I knew, which was that I had not created this situation. I had waited 15 months and asked directly and been ignored. "I love you," I said. "That's not in question. But I need you to find other arrangements. 60 days is enough time." My daughter-in-law came down 20 minutes later. Her response was different, louder, more immediate. She used the word unbelievable several times. She mentioned everything she'd done to make this place livable. I let her finish. I said that I appreciated her contributions and that I wished her well. I went upstairs. My phone showed 11 missed calls by noon. Her mother, her father, her brother, 2 of her friends from the birthday party. I silenced it and went to my workshop and worked on the cabinet until my hands stopped feeling strange. There were several weeks that were hard. I won't pretend otherwise. My son came to me twice, separately from his wife. Once angry, once quieter and more like himself. The second conversation lasted almost 2 hours. He said things that were true, some of them, that I had never been direct about how I felt, that I had let things build. I said he was right about that and that I was saying it directly now. He said he hadn't realized how far things had drifted. "I think you meant it." I said, "The notice stands, but I want to stay in your life." He moved out with his wife on a Saturday in April. They'd found a 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge. The drive was short, but they'd looked at it carefully and the numbers worked. I helped carry boxes for about an hour before my knee told me to stop. We ordered pizza. My daughter-in-law was civil, which I respected. She is not a bad person. She is a person who had never been told no in my house, and that was a thing I had allowed. When they left, I stood in the front doorway, and I watched until I couldn't see the car anymore. Then I went inside. I walked through the rooms slowly, the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, the workshop. I found the spot on the wall where the pegboard ended, and I measured and marked where I wanted to extend it. I went upstairs and I got the good pan out of the box in the garage, and I hung it back on its hook. I moved the coffee maker back to where it had been for 20 years. I sat in the kitchen for a while. The furnace cycled. The second stair creaked in that particular way. Outside, a neighbor was shoveling the last of the April slush off her driveway. I opened the notebook to the last page I'd written on, the question I'd written after the birthday dinner. How long are you going to let this go on? I wrote the answer underneath it. Not for anyone else, just to have it said. Until I remembered who I was. My son calls every week now on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes longer. We're figuring out what we are to each other when no one is in crisis, which is, I think, what we should have been doing all along. His wife is pregnant. I found out in June. I'm going to be a grandfather. I'm not sure yet what kind of grandfather I'll be, but I know it will be on my feet in my own house, with my father's tools on the wall and Patricia's photo on the dresser. The gap under the back door is still there. I ordered the weather stripping last week. I'm going to fix it myself, the way I fix things. Slowly, carefully, making sure it's done right so I don't have to do it again. Some things you have to let drift for a while before you understand what they're worth. And then you set them right, and you go on. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who's living the early version of what I lived through. Someone who's still in the part where the coffee maker just moved to a different cabinet, and they're telling themselves, it's fine, it's just an adjustment. Everyone needs time. I'd want to tell them that the coffee maker is not the point. The coffee maker is just the first sentence of something longer. What matters is whether you read the rest of it honestly. I wasn't dishonest with myself exactly. I knew what was happening in my house. I felt it every time I walked into a room and something was different. Every time I said nothing and watched something else get decided without me. I just kept choosing the interpretation that required the least from me, that it was temporary, that it would sort itself out, that bringing it up would only make things harder. And for 15 months, that choice cost me. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way you lose things you don't notice until they're gone. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where a lonely widower pushed his son away over a chair at a dinner party and called it justice. I've sat with that version. I think you have to. You have to be willing to look at it from every angle before you decide what's actually true. And what I keep coming back to is this. I didn't serve that notice because of the chair. I served it because I had asked directly for a conversation about the future, one conversation, and that ask had been dismissed as a problem I was creating. There's a difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who, when you name the mistake, decides the problem is you're naming it. I had confused my son's discomfort with my own culpability for long enough. What I wish I'd understood earlier is that clarity is an act of care, not just for yourself, for everyone. When I stayed quiet, I wasn't protecting my son from difficulty. I was protecting myself from the discomfort of being direct, and I was teaching him, without meaning to, that the limits of my patience were invisible and had no consequences. That's not kindness. That's a slow kind of harm, dressed up as peacekeeping. The triad that actually held me together through all of it. The thing I'd call wisdom, if I were inclined to use that word about myself, was simpler than any philosophy. I paid attention. I documented what I saw. I got proper legal advice before I acted. That's it. No grand moral framework. Just notice what's real. Name it to yourself, and then move through the world with the information you actually have instead of the version that's easier to live with. My son and I are still finding our footing. Patricia would have handled all of this better than I did. Faster, probably with fewer notebooks and more direct conversations over tea. But she's not here, and I am, and I'm learning that grief doesn't give you permission to disappear into your own house. You still have to show up. You still have to be a person with a position in the world. The weather stripping is on the back door now. Fixed it on a Saturday in May, took about 40 minutes, the draft is gone. Small thing. But I did it, and I did it right, and it will hold. That's enough. That's always been enough.